Hey everyone, as I was writing a script for another video, I had a bit of a thought. I was typing out a line that mentioned something about how nice it is to revisit some old games. But that ended up sticking in my head because I realized that I could come up with numerous examples of games I can't bring myself to play again. And I thought that was interesting. I realized that in a lot of cases, it's games I enjoyed very much when I first played them. So in this video, I decided to list some of those games and see why I don't find them enjoyable to play anymore. Now, this may seem like a potentially negative topic, so I'm trying to not go that direction too much. What I'll do is also mention positives about each game, whether it's something I like, a memory, or perhaps something influential or groundbreaking. The whole point of this video isn't really to squat over a game and unload the brown just for the sake of it, but rather more as a way to ponder how evolution in video game design makes certain older gameplay elements less approachable as time goes on. And that seems to be quite apparent when revisiting an old favorite, and then realizing that the reality is very much challenging the comfortable memory we have constructed in our mind. It's not really about preferring newer games either, or being snobby about graphics. It's a bit of a unique situation depending on the game, and I'll of course mention the reasons when we get to them. With that said, let's start. I'm going to start out with two games at once, Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City. Those games were a big deal at the time. I had played and thoroughly enjoyed GTA 2, so a move to 3D was something I was very excited to see. At the time I thought these games were amazing. I played them so much, who knows how many hundreds of hours I put into them. But these days I don't have that same feeling anymore. I think the main thing is that open world games often impress us with scale and graphics. And the images in my memory look more exciting than what I am presented with when I play GTA 3 or Vice City for real now. The scale doesn't seem that big anymore either, and that sense of freedom I used to get just isn't there anymore. And the main reason for that is the game that followed those two, which is San Andreas. GTA San Andreas is like those two games, but with the scale turned up. In a way, yes, San Andreas isn't that big, but you still get the sense of having traveled a great distance when you go between the cities. Not to mention being able to roam around the rural bits was new and a lot of fun. In fact, I still don't think GTA 5 improved on that in some regards. The rural areas just kind of sit on top of the city, but in San Andreas they are also between major cities, so it doesn't feel so circular. You know, it's like you've got this island feeling going on with GTA 5. So yeah, when being presented with GTA 3 and Vice City, I essentially just go, might as well play San Andreas instead. I'm going to throw in a bunch of Mario games into one segment here. The NES Mario games and Mario 64. I bet that's controversial, not that it really matters. The main reason I don't really want to play the NES Mario games isn't because, you know, any gameplay sort of stuff. It's actually kind of a simple thing. It's because Super Mario All-Stars exists on the Super Nintendo. I mean, the games just look better, so I might as well play that version instead. The thing is, I didn't grow up with the NES games, but if I did, I'd imagine that my opinion would be a little bit different. For example, I grew up playing games on an Amstrad CPC 6128. So, in some instances, I prefer to play the Amstrad ports of games rather than the technically superior arcade versions just because of nostalgia. So, if that was the case with the NES, I think I'd rather play the old games just for the same reason. But still, if Super Mario All-Stars didn't exist, I'd still be happy to play the actual NES versions because they're great games and there's not really any flaw with them. Now, with Super Mario 64, I can say that even when it first came out, I didn't like the controls. It's not the N64 controller, because when I play the Switch version and also on an emulator, I'm still not fine with how it feels. In previous and later games, Mario always feels light on his feet and quick to react, but the N64 game just feels slow and sluggish. I just don't like it. Which is a shame because everything around it I think is really good. Mario 64 offers a lot of freedom, and yeah, later games seem to have gone away with that, and only recently with Odyssey you see some of that return. It's also impressive how Nintendo handled the 2D to 3D transition. That killed so many franchises, but Mario as well as Zelda lived on and became even bigger. Obviously that proves my opinion on Mario 64's controls is definitely not the popular one. But still, I am interested in the game, you know, the importance it had on the gaming industry and sequels and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, when it comes to actually playing it, that's a little bit of a hindrance there with the controls. I really like Pokemon, which I don't think is a secret. It's one of my favorite series, not just from Nintendo, but overall. I actually didn't start playing Gen 1 games at first. Most of my friends had Red and Blue, and I did have a little go. But I started playing with the Gen 2 games. And perhaps that's why I can't really bring myself to play Gen 1 games anymore. The amount of features and refinements between the first two gens is pretty huge, actually. Not to mention being able to traverse 2 regions. Still, that's a rarity today, though the sense of scale is all different now with Sword and Shield, so it's a bit hard to compare those games. But anyway, differences between Gen 1 and 2. Well, there's many more Pokemon. There's new moves, new types, Johto and Kanto regions, genders and breeding, and so on and so forth. Another thing is that Gen 1 games have been remade as well for the Game Boy Advance, Fire Red and Leaf Green, so that's also less of an incentive to play the original Game Boy games there. Plus, it's a Gen 3 game, so it's got all kinds of updates from that generation. But it still retains the 2D gameplay, so I think that's a really good balance in terms of nostalgia, I guess, as well as modern features. Alright, this one is perhaps a bit of a stretch. I say this is a game hard to go back to, but in reality, I never really played Zelda II. I just can't get into it. It's too RPG-like in a clunky way. Plus, it's so difficult and unforgiving. There really isn't too much more to say than that, to be honest. I'd literally prefer to play any other Zelda game instead. But I do think people rag on about it a bit unfairly, probably because they weren't around maybe when the game first came out. There's something interesting about Zelda 2, and you also have to think of the game in context. Back when it came out, there was no other Zelda game, other than the first one, of course. And when you think about it, you can see how they thought Zelda 2 might be a good idea. It seems like they tried to add new gameplay mechanics and increase complexity and depth of the game. Perhaps if they stuck with it, they could have refined the formula to an extent that it would be more accessible to more people. The music is also interesting, and as far as I know, most of the tunes are never heard outside this game. At least not in other Zelda games, as far as I know. I am thankful, though, that they decided to do a 180 with the gameplay and return to the action-adventure style gameplay from the first game. Alright, I'm going to throw in a Neptunia game in here. Maybe some of you are surprised, but maybe you won't be once you realize it's the very first PS3 game of the series. As watchers of the channel will know, I'm a huge fan of Neptunia. I have all the games, and I've done and also will do all sorts of videos on the series. But the first game is a difficult one to play again, even though I did platinum the game. It's just so clunky and unrefined. Because, well, I mean, it is a very low-budget game after all. In terms of gameplay, it was just Trinity Universe with a different storyline, different characters. So basically, yeah, just different visuals. The game also doesn't run that well on the PS3, I think. The supposedly random encounters are actually activated by distance traveled and are really annoying. Dungeons are empty and boring despite the designs promising some potential. But the worst thing must be the combat. It's not a smooth experience at all. And the animations, how they hop around, just looks pretty bad. Visuals aside, the item system is also bizarre because you can't choose when to use items. You have to set a probability value to each and hope that they use the correct items at the right time. I will admit that it can get quite exciting, but it's so frustrating when it usually goes wrong. Either it doesn't activate and you die, or you end up wasting a whole bunch of items for no reason. Despite all that, the very first Neptunia has one thing it does better than basically any other game in the series since, and that is the story. Almost every game since then hasn't lived up to the standard of the first game, in my opinion. Hyperdimension Neptunia has a serious undertone to it, despite the silly shenanigans. The parody levels were higher and smarter, and any self-referential humor and fourth wall breakage was handled with more thought. These days, fourth wall breaking segments in Neptunia games are about as funny as a modern Family Guy cutaway. Okay, that's maybe a bit harsh, but I think the comparison kind of works. Neptunia 1 has many situations that are amusing and clever, and those moments are a little bit harder to come by now. One game that does come quite close to the first one story-wise is Super Neptunia RPG. Again, a lot of people didn't like the gameplay, but I think it's much better than the original PS3 game. Super Nep is a spin-off set in an alternate world, and the tone of the story feels really similar to Hyperdimension Neptunia on the PS3. It's got that serious undertone while also being smarter and more clever about how it parodies things. In the beginning, there's even some dialogue between NPCs where they say if they weren't forced to make games with the same designs and ideas over and over again, then maybe they'd manage to get some good review ratings for a change. The developer's showing some humility there. That's much better than self-indulged references, I think. Next up, it's Battlefield 1942. I've talked about this game before positively, and I still stand by that. I played this game a lot back in the day. I have all the expansions, and I played through single player and also countless online matches too. But at the time, I always thought Call of Duty had more refined controls. That's the first game in the series. Somewhat recently, I played both, and I noticed that the original Call of Duty aged so much better. Battlefield is a bit ugly looking, but that doesn't matter too much. More importantly, it's so clunky, and the sounds aren't that great. At least it's not that satisfying. Remember, this was the beginning of the whole World War II shooter fad, so, I guess it was a period of unrefinement. And there's also technical limitations. For example, Battlefield focused more on large-scale combat with more players, while Call of Duty took place on smaller maps and also with less players, and it also took the more fast-paced approach. That's still the case today. Overall, I think Battlefield 1942 is great at the time, or was great at the time, and I enjoyed it a lot, and I also still have many good memories of playing it. And there you go. A decent selection of games I find difficult to go back to now. I made sure to talk about games I enjoyed at the time, and I still have a positive impression of for whatever reason. You may recognize that some of these games have been in my favorite games videos too, and that was based on how much I enjoyed them at the time. Hopefully that was fun. If you have any personal experiences to add regarding to this topic, please comment below. Remember, you can support the channel in different ways, like buying things from Amazon affiliate links, getting merch, or becoming a supporter on patreon.com/ysn. And even if you don't or can't do that, even just watching is a great help. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.